with audio.
Oh, there's Chris.
Great.
This is exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. Here we go. This is everyone joining. Hello, everybody. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Fantastic. Welcome, everybody. Fantastic. So we'll probably might make a start. It's actually 7:30. You guys are all very punctual, which is fantastic. What I might ask you to do, if that's okay, is if you can mute your audio. We will have a time for asking questions, but it just helps with background noise and things. So if you haven't used Zoom before, normally it should be in the bottom left-hand corner, and it just is. Hopefully, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep, excellent. All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's lovely to have you join us. There'll probably be other people popping up in the next few minutes, which is fine. So I might just change my view. Just a sec. I think we'll do. I think that's bigger. Sure. Okay. Hello. So you guys can hear us all okay? Thumbs up, you can hear? Fantastic. So welcome everybody. It's so lovely to see you all. And just to let you know how tonight will work, what we'll do is Lynnette and I are gonna, we'll talk a little bit together about some of the awesome content that Lynnette's gonna share with us tonight. Then there'll be a time for you guys to ask questions. Then I'll probably ask Lynnette a few more questions, and there'll be another question time at the end. So we'll have 2 question times. So we'd love you guys to contribute. And when you do, if you'd like to ask a question, we'd love it if you can just quickly tell us who you are. Just tell us your name, where you're at, just very quickly, just where I'm from, and your name, and just ask your question. It'd be just nice just to let people know who you are. All right, we'll make a bit of a start. So great to have you guys at the 3rd session of our living room. And for those who haven't joined, the aim of the living room is to get us women across the state, women who are working in Presbyterian ministry across the state, a chance for us to come together, to network, to kind of see each other's faces, and really, I guess, to learn some stuff together. And so I'm really excited to have Lynnette Cain with us, who a few of you I think will know. So Lynnette at the moment is working in 2 interesting roles, and she's going to be sharing from a lot of her ministry experience, and particularly some of the work that you're currently doing, Nettie. Yeah. So obviously we're talking about ministry supervision and mentoring tonight, and Lynnette's currently working in private practice. She's got her own practice called Slower, Deeper, Wiser, where she does ministry mentoring and supervision. And she also works as a pastoral consultant, got the title right, at her church at Multicultural Bible Ministry as well. But Lynnette comes with a wealth of experience. Now, just before we start, can I ask you a little bit about your background?
Sure.
And what are those kind of little, kind of in a potted version, what's kind of got you here to what you're doing now? What's your background?
Yeah. So ladies, can I just say I'm recovering from bronchitis. So if I cough, please excuse me. The talking kind of stirs it up a little bit. So I've been following Jesus for 28 years. I'm a country girl, previous registered nurse. I went to SMBC in the early mid-2000s and did a Bachelor of Theology, and was not looking to go into pastoral ministry actually, and got called to a Presbyterian church down in Canberra, so New Life Presbyterian, where I served full-time for 7 years. Then I got married and inherited 4 gorgeous children. My husband's a widower, and moved up to Sydney, where I started a role with the Baptist Association of New South Wales, ACT. I served as their manager of their professional standards unit for a couple of years before really hearing God speak to me about moving into the prevention area. So I was seeing lots of people in ministry failing at the other end, and I wanted to be really quite proactive in preventing them from getting there, because the other end's really messy. And so I did my graduate certificate in professional supervision in 2017 and started my private practice, as Emma stated. So I do that, and then I work with my church, MBM, doing so pastoral consultancy, so with difficult cases, so domestic and family violence, safe ministry matters, lots of the trickier high-end stuff in church. That's what I do.
You've done a load of stuff.
Yeah.
My goodness. So I'm excited to have Lynnette with us because she does have such a amazing, just a huge breadth and history of ministry. And you've done loads of different things.
Yeah.
And she's also worked for quite a few years in Prezi ministry, which you said, which is kind of exciting.
So 7 years. And then I've only just stepped off actually working denominationally with the Prezis as well.
Yeah. So Lynnette's
I'm actually really Presbyterian. I just go to an Anglican church.
She is, and you've got a great heart for women in the Prezi system, which is so encouraging. So again, we're talking about we'll start with kind of what we're talking about, which is we're looking at professional supervision and ministry mentoring tonight, as well as I'm going to ask Lynnette to share some of her gems of what she's learned in ministry. But just to get us started, I often hear those terms, Lynnette, being talked about, like ministry supervision or mentoring. And at times I feel a bit confused as to what's what. Can you maybe just talk us through, fairly briefly, but talk us through what's the difference between ministry? Yeah, we're trying to keep to time. We did a little practice, so we weren't very good at keeping to time. Anyway,
all right.
The difference between mentoring and professional supervision.
Yeah. So really the guts of the difference is where the focus is. So often, particularly in Christian circles, we think about mentoring as a discipleship. It's part of our discipleship, right? So we get people established in the faith and then we continue to help them grow on their journey. Ministry mentoring has been, developed and around for a while, and it's really focused on helping people to grow in their skills, but also to grow in their whole of life. Professional supervision, particularly in ministry circles, is a recent development. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with the recommendations from the Royal Commission into Institutional Child Abuse, but one of their significant recommendations for churches was that clergy and church staff workers undertake professional supervision as a way of caring for self, but also reflecting on their ministry and having someone else externally do that with them. So it's not like line supervision where you report to your boss and you talk about your work, but an external person who is trained in supervision, who helps you to have a protected regular space to talk about your ministry and what you're doing, for them to ask good questions, for them to help you think in different ways about the work that you're doing. They will ask you hard questions, but they will also encourage you and help you to be, there's a lot of transformational learning that goes on in that space as well. So that's kind of the big difference is the focuses really.
And you do both?
I do both.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I do them separately, but with different people that I work with, I sometimes combine as well. And I'll take off one hat and put another hat on.
Yeah, okay.
But one of the key things when doing this is you want to be looking for people who are trained, so particularly in professional supervision, that they're qualified in that. And also that they are very good at having good, clear contracts about what type of work you're doing and what you are wanting from them. And it's particularly supervision. It's about, it's about you and what you want. So it's very client focused.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful.
And contextualized for what you're doing.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Now, I remember years ago when you were working, I presume it was down in Canberra. Yeah. And I remember you were telling me that you had a professional supervisor. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, golly, I hadn't ever thought about doing that. So in some ways you were an early adopter of this.
I was, yeah. So
So can you tell us a bit about why you decided to have a professional supervisor, and what do you think were the benefits for you in doing that when you were working in a ministry role?
Yeah. So I've been mentored and supervised since I started ministry. So I started, paid ministry, I guess, in 2008. And those first 18 months in ministry, you're trying to find your feet. You're trying to work out, what am I doing? Who am I in ministry? What's this caper all about? And about 18 months in, I actually was asked by PSS to go and interview a potential counsellor to go on the counselling list.
What's PSS, by the
Sorry,
way?
good question. It used to be, it's Jericho Road now, Presbyterian Social Services.
Okay.
Sorry, Anna.
No, that's fine.
That's
good.
And so they asked me to go and interview this lady to see if she was suitable to go on the list.
Right.
And while we were talking, she mentioned that she was a professional supervisor. She had actually been in ministry herself in a role similar to mine for 8 years. Before going into counselling, and she explained to me what it was, and I thought, oh my goodness, that's exactly what I need, because it was that at that point, at about 18 months in, that I kind of got to the end of myself, and I needed someone to help me to think about what I was doing and where I was struggling and what I was struggling with. And I saw her then for the rest of my time down in Canberra. So we were together for about 6 years actually. And she was fantastic for me. So I was down in Canberra. So I was single in ministry, so in parish. So I was 42 when I married Gordon. And it was just so helpful to have someone outside of the ministry team for me to talk to about the things that I was struggling with. So when I was having issues with my boss, and I had an awesome boss, but, we're human, so we still had issues. I couldn't go to anyone else in the church. I certainly didn't want to talk to his lovely wife about it. So having someone that I could debrief and work through those situations with him was so helpful. One of the things that we struggle with in parish, we're on the front line of ministry, right? So we're in the beautiful mess of people's lives, but that takes its toll on us. So there's a thing called vicarious or secondhand trauma that people in ministry get from hearing the stories of the marriages breaking down, of their children who are dying of cancer, of the mental health people that we're working with. There are so many sad situations that we're dealing with, and we are that's on us as well as we hear those stories. So she was so helpful for me to process those things with, and to also help me to think differently about some of the situations. So, a couple of classic things that I remember her being so helpful in. We had a 3-year-old in our congregation who was diagnosed and eventually died from a very serious cancer. He was 3. He was in a very dysfunctional family. My minister wasn't able to provide much support because he and his wife had had a child die at 28 days. And so they were then stuck in grief themselves because of what it brought up for them. So I was kind of holding things together. But they are in Sydney and I was down there and I was traveling, and she just really helped me keep perspective, process my emotions, and just really keep me on track. I had one of our women at church was a high level working in the Defence Force, and she was pregnant for the first time. She rang me from the top of a building and said, Lynnette, I'm going to jump. And then, having to get engaged mental health services and all that, that's quite a lot to deal with.
That's a pretty stressful day at the office.
Pretty stressful day at the office. So being able to process those situations with someone who's external to the ministry team, so they're not engaged in the life of the church and stuff. So there's that lovely objectivity as well as the clinical experience and just the ministry experience that someone else can bring to the table.
Yeah, that's so valuable, isn't it? I mean, that's something I think I've noticed as I'm sort of out and about chatting with different people in ministry, is the thing that seems to come up quite a bit is this real challenge of we want to be real and authentic with the people that we're ministering with, but there is a sense of we need to be careful if we're in ministry leadership. And so there's this sense of loneliness and isolation and who do I actually talk to when things are really getting stressful and unraveling? I can't necessarily blurt it out to my Bible study group, and actually who do I talk to? And I think that's a question that I think is a fairly common question from people I'm talking to, is who do I actually who can I talk to about things that are really difficult?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a couple of clients today, and one lady, so she works with the Baptist Association in another part of the state, and she came in and said, Lynnette, you are the only person I can talk to this about. So some staff difficulties they were having.
Oh, definitely.
And so for her, just being able to share and unload and then help her to look at things from different angles and think through with her, like, how else can I go back and engage in a godly way with this situation? So giving her some strategies to think through, helping her to look at it from different perspectives, and then help her to then be able to re-engage back in those situations. Yeah,
and I think
really
that's
valuable.
a good point you made, in that I think there are so many stressors in ministry, particularly when it's coming from your team, which I'm sure we've all experienced. There's no such thing as teams that never have a problem.
Not yet.
There's always going to be difficulties, I think, in working with teams. And I think, again, in my experience, that's one of the things that's most difficult to know how to deal with, because you obviously cannot be talking about that with people in your actual context, but the need to be able to process that and think wisely and carefully is huge, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's where having someone external to the situation can be so helpful, and helping you to think through different things. Yeah,
no, that's helpful. So if someone was thinking about actually wanting to get a mentor or a supervisor, and obviously that's something that I guess I've got an invested interest in, that I'm super keen to see more people actually take on ministry mentors or supervisors. I think I've got a great heart for that. I think it's really important. What should people look for? Like what kinds of things should people be wary of or careful about when they're thinking about engaging someone in that role?
Yeah. So if we're thinking about either mentors or supervisors, so we'll start with supervisors. So ideally you want to have a supervisor who is trained in supervision, and they're becoming more available. Ideally, if you're in ministry, and like for myself, this has been so beneficial for having someone who's also been in ministry, so understands what it's like to be in the trenches and some of the challenges that you face. You want someone who will not just sit and listen and reflect, and you want someone who will engage with you and ask you the good and hard questions, someone who will keep you accountable, someone who doesn't give you advice, but helps you to work through different scenarios and give you some strategies and options, but not someone that tells you what to do. You want someone who doesn't do all the work in the room, so you should be the one who's doing most of the talking, not them.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Those sorts of
and just
things.
A question I hadn't really thought about, but any ideas on kind of time frame? Like, because I think sometimes people worry about, oh goodness, what happens if I hook up with someone but then I don't know if it's working? Like, what are your thoughts on kind of starting out, and in terms of reviewing or length of time, like any practical suggestions there?
So what you really want is a supervisor who will do a good, clear contract with you. The way that I've set my private practice up is that I contract with someone, but we contract that we'll do 4 sessions together, because that gives you, and these are generally monthly sessions, that gives you enough time to develop a working relationship. But you should have yearly contracts, and you should do a review every 6 to 8 sessions about how the relationship is going.
That's helpful.
It's very important that you have an overall contract, but a good supervisor will always contract with you at the start of a session. What is it that you actually want to deal with today?
So there's sort of structure and purpose to what you're doing.
Because it's about your agenda and what you're bringing to the table. They will have questions, like I will have questions that I will ask. So I always do like to check with my supervisees how they're going with Jesus and how's family life, because they're two. Obviously, we do ministry out of who we are, and so checking in on those things is really important. But even when I'm contracting with a client, I will get permission from them that they are 2 of the standard questions that I will ask during
that's
sessions.
Helpful. No, that's really good.
And generally, supervision is once a month, but can be flexible. So some of my clients travel to see me, so we do that second monthly. Some clients, so I have some from up and down the coast, so we might meet face to face every 6 months, but then Skype.
Yeah, sure.
Which works really well.
Okay, that's useful.
Hmm.
So I'd love to, sorry, I'm going to throw it up to these guys for a question, but was there anything else you just wanted to say?
I was just going to say, I see my supervisor monthly and I'm very thankful.
Yeah.
So I think
and that's great to know that supervisors have supervisors. Again, Absolutely. That's a lovely accountability too, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's 11 years I've been having supervision and I thank God for it all the time.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
Questions?
Open to you guys. Do anyone have comments or a question regarding supervision or mentoring? Has anyone had experience that was either positive or negative, or just any questions of Lynnette regarding this kind of area? And if you want, just unmute yourself and just tell us quickly who you are and then ask your question. Anyone brave to ask a question?
It's Ashley.
Oh, hi, Ashley. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, and everybody else.
And Ashley, you're from, just tell us, is it Reeves?
I operate a charity called Hope House, which tries to prevent abortion and help mothers keep their babies. I've wanted a mentor for some time, but as I have zero disposable income, is there anyone that does it for nothing?
So what I've been, so one of my sort of goals for myself in the job is to be able to set up a mentoring or a supervision network. So what I've been in the process of doing is kind of emailing different people who are qualified mentors, and I've been asking them just that. I've been saying, in what capacity do you work? Because there is a variety, like people will obviously work in a paid capacity, some in a voluntary. So there are people who do it actually in a voluntary capacity. So again, this is, I guess I'm hoping to raise people's interest, and certainly if you're interested, I can try to put you in contact if particularly you're looking for someone who did that on a voluntary basis. Yeah, there's probably more that will be doing that for a fee, which I think is appropriate, because I think it is actually there's a sense where it is a professional service, but there are a few people who will do that on a voluntary basis as well. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah. Anyone else with a question or comment? Rosalind?
Yeah, I am doing a short mentoring course. So as part of that, I need to find a mentor and I need someone to mentor. And I've just had the first session of both of those. I've had the first session with my mentor, who is not paid, and the first session with the person I'm mentoring, and I'm not getting paid for that either. And both of those experiences have been very positive, and I can see benefit from both for me as a person.
Fantastic. Can you tell us quickly a little bit about what course are you doing, Ros?
I'm doing the Presbyterian Youth mentoring course, which is it's the 3-year one compressed. No, not
that's the one you've done, Nettie. So
shortened.
So it's like a fast track.
No, it's a fifth of it.
A fifth of it.
Not actually, you're not doing the same load in a smaller time. You're actually doing less study. Sure. And so that's a day face-to-face. The rest of it's online, and that's over 18 months.
Fantastic. And so you're just in the early days, but it sounds so far so good.
Yeah, so far it's been very positive.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Anyone else, any questions or comments regarding?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. Hi, I'm Jenny from City Central Presbyterian Church in Wollongong.
Oh, hey, Jenny.
Hi. I just want to clarify the difference between professional supervision and mentoring. So if if I was to go to either one of those, what sort of things would I be discussing with a mentor as opposed to a supervised? Yeah. Can you help me there?
Yeah. So if you were to come to me, Jenny, for mentoring, we would look at 4 life domains.
Yep.
So we'd look at your personal life with Jesus. We'd look at your relationships. So whether you were married or single, friendships, all that sort of stuff. We would look at your work, which may be separate to your ministry or may not. And we would look at your ministry. And so there is a whole, I have a number of exercises and different things that we would do to work together to look at developing goals for those 4 areas of life, and anything else that you might identify that you want to work through.
Okay.
Yep.
So professional supervision,
Yep.
So the things you would discuss there in terms of ministry would be more issues that I was having or stressful situations with particular people. Is that right?
That's correct. So it's much more focused on ministry particularly, and your role in that,
right,
and the cases that you're dealing with. So
Okay.
that doesn't exclude who you are as a person.
Sure.
When in supervision, when we look at your personhood in the context of you doing ministry, it's how your personhood is being affected by or is affecting your ministry.
Okay, got it. Thank you very much. That's helpful.
Is that clear?
Yep, that's exactly what I want to know. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to...
Great to ask that extra clarification, because I think it's one of those areas that people do get a bit confused over. So thank you for that.
I can see that it overlaps.
It absolutely does. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
There's shared skill sets and there's shared things that you work on.
Yep.
But their focus is quite different.
Yep. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Welcome.
Hey there, Cheryl.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Lynnette, men mentoring women or not?
I don't mentor men, but I supervise men.
Okay, how does that work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's different because I'm not passing on, in a sense, my skills and knowledge in ministry and being a wife or a mother or a whatever, but we are focused on helping them think through their ministry and what they're doing.
Yeah.
And talking. So because of the focus, it's quite different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and in mentoring, I'm much more likely to self-reveal stuff and, talk about how I've worked through this issue, or, this is my experience in this area. In supervision, I'm not doing that.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So that level of sharing is different, and the focus is different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tough.
So when we think of, mentoring is like discipleship in a way. It's just a bit, we're just dealing with people a bit further down the track. Supervision is much more focused on the business end instead.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have, chaplains, I have senior ministers, associates. I actually have quite a few men in my practice.
Okay.
Yeah. Presbyterian, Anglican, Pentecostal, Independent.
That's good. That's great. Thanks.
That's great. And Cheryl, just before you sort of zone out for a bit there, can you just tell us, where you're doing ministry at the moment? Just nice to see what people are doing.
So I have 2 jobs in the Presbyterian Church. One is with a national committee, a GAA committee. It's Australian Presbyterian World Mission. So I work for Kevin Murray. He says that means I tell him what to do. That's not true at all, but that's what he tells people. And then my other job is with the Gospel Society and Culture Committee in New South Wales. So I'm their researcher. And I'm at church at Redemption Hill, which is a church plant, a bit homeless at the moment. We're meeting in a shed, aren't we, Jenny? So we're trying to get women's ministry going.
Fantastic.
So most of my ministry is actually working for the Presbyterian Church all week. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. It's always just really, I just knew you were doing some interesting things. It's lovely people to hear what each other is doing.
Thanks.
We've probably got time just for a couple more questions. Does anyone have comment or question regarding sort of mentoring, supervision, that kind of stuff?
Heather in Grafton. Yep.
Oh, hi,
Heather.
Heather. Hi, Heather. It's funny. It's funny trying to work out where people are on the screen. Hello, Heather.
Coming and going. I was just wondering, Lynnette, with your mentoring, you probably have a contract as well.
Yes, that's right.
And do you do a similar? I didn't actually understand the 4 sessions that you mentioned right at the beginning when you were talking about contract compared to reviewing every 6 to 8 sessions, having a monthly meeting.
Yeah.
What's the 4 sessions? Was that a kind of initial check that the relationship's worthwhile to pursue?
Yeah, that's right. So it's a little bit like counselling, right? It's as much about the chemistry that you have with the counsellor as well as their skills. So it's the same. It's the same with a mentor or a supervisor. You want to know that what they bring to the table and what you're looking for is actually a good fit.
Yeah.
And that should be both ways. So you know, at the end of 4 sessions, I might think that actually what you're wanting to do and my experience aren't really going to work. So it's an out for both sides. And it's normally 3 to 4 sessions before you actually build a relationship enough so that you know whether you can work together or not, because there's an awful lot of trust that needs to be built. And so with some of my mentees or supervisees, I may have a prior relationship, and that's really easy to build on. But when it's people that are coming cold, it takes a bit of time to warm up to them, get to know them. Yeah. And then after those 4 sessions, every sort of 6 to 8 sessions after that, you do a mini review and just check that you're on track and that they're getting from me what they need. And also that I think that they're still engaged with the process.
Yeah, so I did the course with Peter and Sally, Peter Moore and Sally. And that's a really good comment in my experience. So the person might have come into the mentoring relationship thinking one thing, but when you suggest anything, they don't, like exercises. I had one woman who never really did the exercises, although my supervisor suggested that could have been a personality thing and that she was a person who needed to do it with you because she wasn't a reflective type. So I guess if they still feel like they're getting something from it and you feel like it's worthwhile too as a mentor, it's okay to proceed. But if I can see that there might be times where you feel like, well, you're not really gaining, they're not gaining from it.
But I think it's good to ask them the question, because our perception can be quite different from theirs. I think that's good. And I think too, one of the things for us to work at is actually thinking, particularly even if we know people, understanding their personality types and their learning styles. So I'm someone that loves reading and engaging that way, but other people don't. And so I have to keep working hard at understanding who they are and using a range of different ways to work well with them so that we're getting the information or working on the issues that we need to work on.
And in your mentoring, would you ask that same question about what would you particularly like to work on today, or was that more your focused supervision?
Yeah, so I would do that more in my supervision, and that's one of the differences. So with a mentee, we normally have agreed goals that we're working towards, and so they would have had homework and we would be catching up on that. But sometimes, you know, mentees come in with crisis situations that they actually want to work through, and that's fine to table that and work through that session. Like, I quite happily do that. But as the mentor, my job is to make sure that I'm holding the space for them. So that means that next session, I'm the one that's responsible to get us back on track and work out where we are, or to take the initiative to say to them, hey, this was the crisis that happened last time. Do we need to renegotiate what we're working on and focus on something else for a period of time?
Yes, yeah. It might be good to raise. Do you want to just modify your goals for the moment? Yeah.
Yeah. And
because something's become a big issue that's ongoing.
Yes, and it's good to remember that the goals are there to serve, not to be the master. So flexibility is so important, I found.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. But it is important also then too to have goals so that you're not like, you've got to have something to be working towards as well. So it's just managing that.
Yes, and I think because I did the same sort of thing where in the course you had to have a mentor, and they recommended you continue to have a mentor, and I was very reluctant to give that up anyway, because it's such a delightful thing to have someone who's listening to you for a whole hour. Man, it's beautiful. And where was I going? Oh dear. Oh, sorry, I've lost my thread there.
Okay.
That's all right.
Yep, never mind. That's me.
That's fine. Thanks so much, Heather.
Anyway,
So,
good. Thanks.
I'm going to ask Lynnette a few more questions now, but we will have a time again at the end before we finish up, wrap up, and I'll pray for us. There'll be another chance for you guys to make comments and questions again. So now I'm going to ask Lynnette.
Grill me.
I'm going to grill her, because I just figure, you know, when someone's got such a lot of ministry experience as you in a range of different areas, what I really want to know is, what are your take homes? Like, what are your 3 key lessons? What are the kind of 3 gems you reckon over your years of ministry of reflecting and learning? What are kind of those 3 really key things that you feel God's taught you and shown you that you can share with these guys so that they can glean some of your wisdom and experience?
So I think the biggest thing, both for myself in ministry and then those that I work with, is we need to know ourselves. We need to know who we are. We need to know what our baggage is, what our fears are, where our weaknesses are, but also how God has put us together. One of the tools that I like to use is the Myers-Briggs type indicators. Now, that's not gospel. It's a helpful tool. There are a number of helpful tools out there. But I've been using Myers-Briggs in my nursing career. So I've been using it for about 20 years.
Okay.
And I have found it to be very helpful to understand some of our preferences. Some of the things that I found particularly helpful in ministry to understand about myself, but also those I work with in team, in particular, this is where it's been really helpful for myself and for the teams that I work with, not so much the people in our congregations, but like if you go into ministry as an extrovert and thinking that it's just going to be awesome being with people all the time and it's going to really fill your boat, my previous trainees, who some have been like the most extreme extroverts I've ever met, have learned that actually ministry is very draining, and being with people all the time. Lynnette, I think I'm becoming an introvert. It's like, well, no.
Ministry will do that to you. So that's interesting for them to kind of, and for you to realise, how do you think the personality things were useful there?
Yeah, so useful in helping them to understand the need for boundaries and the need for Sabbath and the need for time down. Really important. So those self-care strategies. But also when working with a team, what are the different needs of the team? So I'm an outgoing introvert. I love people. I'm really warm and good with people, have a good EQ. But I recharge by being by myself. And if I didn't protect my day off, I'd be smashed.
It'd look pretty messy.
Yeah. And I think what I've learned, particularly in the last couple of years, is that Sabbath isn't just a once a week thing,
okay,
but the need for daily Sabbath rituals as well. And I'm not talking just about our, you know, our quiet times with God, but actually quite intentional time down to recharge and replenish. Now, you know, we all have busy lives, and that might be 10, 15 minutes or 30 minutes in the day. But one of the strategies I've been using quite successfully with my clients has been the idea of micro Sabbaths during the day.
Yeah, okay.
So I've actually got a few of them practicing it, because it's something new that I'm trying to use as a strategy. And yeah, I've got males and females doing it, and they're finding it quite refreshing to intentionally take out half an hour in the middle of the day, sort of between 12 and 1, get out of the office or not have anyone booked for that time, and actually do something that restores them. So, you know, going for a walk, you know, one of them is going and meditating in one of the other offices in the building, you know, as in Christian meditation. Yeah.
But yeah, for just, finding creative ways to do that. And,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And as you say, it's kind of about learning about yourself and learning
That's right.
about what you actually need in order to keep yourself sustained and filled.
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the other, so there's, sorry ladies, if you don't know Myers-Briggs, there's kind of there's 8 letters, and then you kind of get a type of 4. And the EI, the extrovert introvert, is at the start, and that's really about where you get your energy from. So do you get your energy from people or from being alone? The last 2 letters are the letters J and P. So it's basically whether you like structure or whether you're a go with the flow person. Now we all know ministry is fairly go with the flow, right? Like anybody can ring up at any time, and you might have structured time set aside in different spaces, and you're able to keep with that. But I learnt in ministry that my high level of J can be kind of hard to work, hard on me, because ministry is so flexible. My ministry team were all P's, and so they dealt
What's
with
the P?
So that's just go with the flow.
Okay, go with the flow.
You know,
okay.
big picture. J's like detail and structure, and the job is never done.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I had to learn to be more go with the flow and just kind of let things go. But it was also worked out well, because I helped the J's get organised and get things done. But also like learning to play to your strengths and work together as a team. I didn't have to be everything to everybody. And also learning that when I'm under stress, so when we're under stress, we tend to revert to type. So even though I could maybe be a bit more chilled and a bit more go with the flow, if things were stressful at church, I would revert back to needing lots of structure and organisation, which could become problematic, because if I wasn't getting that, you know, I might get a bit cranky or short-tempered, and I needed to know my triggers so that I could interact with the team and with the church family well.
And it sounds like it also gave you a bit of an awareness around other people as well. Like, how did it work? Like, did you get people to do the tests? Like, I don't know, how did it actually practically work?
They didn't like the idea of being pigeonholed, because they're P's.
Yeah, okay.
But
it sounds like it helped you to be a little bit more patient or understanding and flexible.
That's
and
right.
less judgy of other people.
And also understanding then, because obviously I've done lots of reading around this, but working how I can work best. So what are the communication strategies that work for
that's
them?
useful.
Yeah.
So
and
understanding
really
how
helpful.
I can make adjustments or accommodate
Yeah.
my own self
Yeah.
in ways that are going to be productive.
That's right.
Okay.
And that's a real way to love and serve them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, so
there you go. So that's
know yourself. Other things
what
I
else
think.
would you say? What's
Yeah,
another
know
top
your
tip?
conflict style.
Okay.
So there are some, Speedy Lee's. There's some really good tests out there that you can do. Speedy Lee's is the most Speedy. He's an American.
Okay.
So Speedy's his.
And I think were you
name.
saying to me that you were going to maybe send me some of these? So,
I'm going to send some resources to Anna,
and I will send them out.
And just send them out to you. I have some really helpful resources on Myers-Briggs and some conflict testing
that'd be awesome.
stuff.
I know you've given me some really helpful stuff in the past that I found really useful to look over. So that'd be great.
Yeah. So I don't like conflict at all. We'll you know, I'd much prefer to be the peacemaker and smooth the waters and make everything okay. But again, that only works for so much. And so I really had to learn how to deal well and maturely with conflict, because there's lots of conflict in churches and parishes and ministry teams.
How do you think how did you learn to deal with conflict more helpfully, do you think?
Yeah, so I like reading on these things and thinking about these things. So my mentor then was also really helpful with that, because the mentor that I had at the time, she was very experienced, and so we would talk through scenarios and the issues around that. So that was really helpful, and it was really helpful as I recognised the deficit or the tendency in myself to actually take that to the ministry team and for that to be a discussion amongst us, because we did all have different styles, and that played out in different ways.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So
useful. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. So have you got a third one? Third gem?
Do you know what? I think that was my first one.
Okay. That was a long gem.
Sorry.
That was a good gem.
We promised that we're going to be finished by now.
We'll be fine. We'll be fine.
The second one is just the reality that people are messy. So one of the things that I found going from being a registered nurse in Sydney and in emergency departments, I dealt with mess all the time. Druggos we would have messed up their highs, so, you know, they'd abuse you. Lots of challenging situations. So I was really used to messiness in people's lives.
Ready and prepared for that?
I was. I thought, you know, good to go. God's prepared me through my nursing career for that. The thing I hadn't counted on was the fact that I was going to have to see these people every week. They were in my life every week. There was no walking out on them after an 8-hour shift. They were there, and I was called by Jesus to love them and to be his hands and feet to them. And so it took me a while and some work with our minister, who's really good at just being able to sit with people in the mess and deal with that. So one of the things that goes along with that is learning that we are not responsible for people in their lives. So we can challenge them, we can encourage them, we can love them and support them and pray with them and help them to know Jesus better. But at the end of the day, they are the ones who have to make the decisions about their life. And as much as we may not disagree, like we may not agree with their decisions, and we may have to actually help them clean up the results of their decisions, they still have responsibility for themselves, and that we can actually only be responsible for ourselves. So I'm not responsible for someone's salvation. I mean, you know, I've had parishioners who have, you know, said, you know, Lynnette, you didn't do this thing for me, so I'm not coming to church anymore. And having to not like own that, you know, it's not me that she's rejecting in a sense, but it's Jesus that she's rejecting. And knowing that I'm not responsible for her salvation. Yeah. Now, I also have to reflect on that, because there may have been something in that I have actually done, and then being Christ-like in that by recognizing, repenting, apologizing, and working with them on that. Does it make
it
sense?
Does. I think that's one of the hugely challenging things I think about ministry, in that our work is people, isn't it? And obviously we're in the business of people's lives being transformed. I mean, that's what we're longing for in ministry. That's what we're praying for. And yet it's not completely in our control, is it? So we can be faithful, and yet sometimes the fruit isn't there. Or people will make bad decisions, or they won't grow in Christ. And and the messiness will get in the way. But I think it can be a real challenge as we think about, well, what does it mean for me to be doing my job well? And I think that at times can be discouraging or hard or confusing to kind of work out, what does it look like for me to do my role faithfully, particularly when sometimes maybe the outcomes that we've hoped for might not always be there. I think that can be really hard and discouraging at times.
Yeah, that's good. And I think the third big thing that I would say is that self-care matters. And in fact, self-care is a very important way for us to love the church family. If we're not looking after ourselves, we're grumpy with people, we're disorganized, you know, we're not present for them. I think often, you know, we'll think of Paul's words, you know, where we're to pour ourselves out like a drink offering, but we forget to reflect on Jesus' life and how he approached ministry. So he didn't say, you know, he didn't do everything. He didn't say yes to everything. He lived within the physical boundaries that God gave him while he was here on earth. So he slept, he ate, he partied and hung out with friends. He had time alone and prayed with God. You know, he got tired, he cried. You know, people's grief in their lives weighed on him, even though he knew what was coming. He lived within his boundaried space. And I think we can sometimes think that we have to, you know, pour out our life like Paul said he was pouring out his life. But we need to remember that Jesus was here physically amongst us and lived within those boundaries. So we need to be really intentional and serious about looking after ourselves as God calls us to. So he's given us Sabbath as a gift, 24 hours to rest, to reflect, to worship, and to recover. You know, he made night and day. Our modern times means that, you know, with lights and all of our modern conveniences, we can kind of say, ha, God, we've got you there. But we still need 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night. We need that rest and that recuperation. We actually need to not be working from 7 in the morning till 10 at night. That's not godly. That's actually unwise. God has put limits in our bodies and in our days. We all need to eat, sleep, have good relationships, have rest and recreation. And we have a responsibility to model that to our church family and to care for ourselves. Like, it's no good burning out. You know, Paul says that our Christian life, our life is a marathon, and our ministry needs to be a marathon as well, where we look after ourselves so that we can keep serving. And I think one of the real challenges for us as women is that we feel guilty when we do things for ourselves. And so I want to encourage you to look to Jesus. He took time out. He rested. He slept. And he lived within the limits that God gave him. And so we should be wise and follow his model in that, I think.
Yeah. It's sort of in some ways so simple and yet so hard, I think, often. To often do. Yeah, it's hard because it takes intention. It actually takes effort. It's like relationships. So to be friends, like, it takes effort. We need to book in time to see each other and to actually be interested and engaged in the other person. You know, I think anything that's good in life actually does take effort. Yeah, and can be uncomfortable because sometimes you know, maybe saying no to things or pushing back on something or even giving something up if you had to actually isn't easy to do. That's right. So that's what's interesting, isn't it? I think as well, is that sometimes those things that actually are good for us can be, in the short term, really quite difficult to do, and they can actually produce anxiety in the short term because maybe we have to deal with people's disappointment or their expectations of us and things like that. And that's one of the great things about having a mentor or a supervisor, is to help you to work through these things and to keep you accountable in that as well. Yeah, that's really true. So obviously, you know, in your current work, Lynnette, and I know in previous roles you've had loads of, you know, conversations with people in ministry as people have shared their challenges. What do you think, in your experience, are kind of some of the most common pitfalls that you see people in ministry, you know, kind of coming up against or coming undone with? Like, what do you think are the things that we need to be aware of that seem to come up as things that you're seeing a bit more regularly?
Yeah, so I would say that taking self-care seriously is a real challenge for everybody. So I don't think there would be one client that I'm working with that self-care is not part of the agenda.
Okay.
So, yeah, so taking it seriously and working that into our lives, actually, so what we've talked about, it takes effort, and it really takes support to do that well. Because, you know, our parish lives are busy, our own lives are busy, and actually making that time and not feeling selfish about that is really important.
What do you think sort of stops people, Nettie? Like what do you think it is that gets in the way of people self-caring in ministry?
So I think it's valuing that. So I think definitely one of the challenges is remembering first and foremost that we're a child of God and that we have inherent value because of that, and that the work that we're doing in our ministries does not equal who we are. And so they're, you know, helping them untangle that and finding their identity in Christ and not in what they're doing in ministry is really key. So you really need, you know, when you're working with people, you're wanting to dig that bit deeper and actually see what's going on underneath for those kind of those surface issues.
Okay.
I think what I said before, like I know I helped change the mind frame of one of the guys I was working with by saying your self-care is actually a way that you're serving the church. And that really helped him to reframe what he was doing and actually gave him permission, I think, to implement a couple of small things that have actually made a big difference for him in having the energy to do ministry well.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that, so particularly for, you know, for women, I don't know, how many of you are in part-time roles? Can you put up your hand if you are? Yeah, so that's most of you. So we all know that working part-time, it's never really part-time, right? And there's the challenge of trying to do it all. But we can't do it all because we're not God. And so actually working hard at thinking through so some of the things that I really work through people, what are my values? So what are my core values?
Yeah.
And then how do they, sorry, I'm not Italian, but I use my hands a lot. So then how is what I'm doing, how does that match up with my core values?
Yeah, okay.
And actually, are there things in my life that I've said yes to or that I'm doing that maybe I need to rethink?
Because it's the creep, isn't it? And I think
absolutely.
I think it's hugely challenging, isn't it? Because when you think about what is it that leads to us taking on what we've taken on, and it's such a mixture of things, isn't it? Like maybe there was something that we've intentionally taken on that's in line with the principles and values, but then there's kind of a whole lot of other stuff that maybe is murkier as to why we've taken it on, and whether we should keep doing it. It gets quite complicated, and
it does.
And it's all in the mix, isn't it, of expectations or pressures, or if I don't do it, then what's going to happen? There's a whole lot going on, isn't there?
Yeah. And, you know, that's one of the reasons why mentoring and supervision is really helpful, is because it helps us to stop and to reflect on what we're doing. In the busyness of our everyday lives, it can be really hard to do that. And sometimes having someone else look at the list of things that you're doing and ask you some really good questions about why you're doing it and how effective are you being and stuff, can be really helpful. So I did that as an exercise with my mentor 3 years ago. And when we did the list of the different ministries that I was doing, I had way too much on my plate because we just, I should get involved in that. And that's a good thing. I think I had something a little bit ridiculous, like 12 different things I was doing.
But when you're kind of in it, it's like the soup that you're swimming in. So
and you that's right. And not having clarity about
kind of that broader view.
So stepping out, like knowing, you know, I knew that it was too much, but I couldn't see a way forward. And so I did an exercise with my mentor, and just looking at them all, I just went, that's nuts. Like some things have to go. And so over the last 3 years, I've been chipping away at making that a much more reasonable list and looking at, you know, where am I being most effective? Where do I think God's really called me to? What's had its season? So this year's been a big year for me. Like, I've given up a number of ministries in different denominations that have been really special for me and I've loved, but God is just, it's a season to let things go.
And that's not always a very easy thing to do, is it?
No,
I think
it's
particularly
not.
with one of those decisions, I think I was able to see you having to do that, and
really wrestle.
that was not an easy thing, even though you were convicted it was the right thing. It was actually quite painful, I think, for you to let that go.
But having made those decisions is really, it was just important to do.
That's right.
And I think that's one of the reasons why mentoring and supervision are so helpful, because they interrupt practice and get us to stop and think about what we're doing. Yeah.
Okay. Any other couple more gems, and then we'll throw it open to you guys for some questions. What other sorts of
I'm just going to my notes because
go for it.
Yeah. So that one thing that I did want to have a word about was just encouraging you all to maintain friendships outside of your ministry. I was single in parish for 7 years before getting married, and I know that that's something that I did. I allowed myself to be completely immersed into church family life, which was a blessing in lots of ways, but also it meant that at one point, I think it was probably my 5th year, I was very close to burnout. And I know that one of the things that I neglected was having mutually supportive relationships outside of ministry. We need our friends. So whether we're married or single, we need to have good, healthy friendships where we're just able to be ourselves and be authentic in and just be us, you know. I just want to be Nettie sometimes and just be, you know, the silly woman that I can sometimes be. I shouldn't always be on with the ministry hat, you know, and thinking about that. Yeah. So I think that that's something that's key, and that's something that keeps popping up with my mentees and my supervisees as well, is that prioritization of external friendships where they're just being able to be themselves.
Yeah. And again, it's that interesting thing, isn't it, of it's that crazy catch-22 that when you do get sort of so caught up in your ministry and it's kind of taking everything from you, you end up kind of with less energy for those external things.
Absolutely.
But yet then it's actually something that becomes, you know, it kind of works against you. Yeah, it perpetuates. Yeah. So it can be just a helpful diagnostic, kind of, is to be able to look at, to kind of do that a bit of inventory of your life and think, actually, is there a healthy balance of things that are outside and inside my ministry world? Yeah, and kind of as I look at my energy allocation, you know, does that look like that's a healthy balance?
Yeah.
And
I think the last thing I'd say, and I had this discussion with some Anglican ministers the other day, and that is that there's not just one silver bullet to keep us going in ministry. So supervision won't be the super bullet, mentoring won't be the silver bullet, just taking a Sabbath won't be the silver bullet. It actually takes a variety of measures that are suited to who we are as people to keep us going and to keep us fresh in ministry. And this is a little bit where understanding who you are comes into play. And I was talking to Anna yesterday, actually, about this little theory I have about rest. So I talk to people about there being different types of rest. Now, I found this a really helpful thing when I was in parish, and have kind of developed it a bit more sense. So I want to talk about 3 types of rest. So there's recovery rest, recovery rest that we all need at different times from our weeks. So recovery rest for me looked like blobbing on the lounge with binge watching TV cop shows, to be honest, The Closer or Major Crimes. And that, oh, anyway, so there's that. There's, I know, I'll get carried away, sorry. There's restorative rest. So that's doing things which feed your soul and feed you as a person. If you're a creative person, it might be having a couple of hours sewing. It might be, although that can be that can be recreated. It might be, for me, it was, reading a good Christian book, maybe having coffee with a friend and talking over things. And then there's recreative rest. So not recreation, but recreative. So actually creating something, having some output. And thinking, so that might be baking, or it might be gardening, or it might be, sewing and making something, but they're actually being a physical output, which we don't always get in ministry, because there's just lots of talking and praying, which are wonderful things as well. But thinking about those types of rest, it can be a good diagnostic for us to see how we're traveling in ministry. So if our day off or our downtime is always in the recovery phase,
which is the kind
which
of
is
low
watching
energy,
TV, not having, just,
in front of Netflix.
not being able to do much,
Yeah.
Then there's something wrong with the rest of our week. As we think about how we're resting, we can think through, am I doing those things in my week that actually help me to stay fresh in mini? So that's the restorative stuff. And for different personalities, there are different things which resonate. So an example of that, for extroverts, because you like people and stuff, going to a retreat or a conference will be a really restorative thing for you to do, because you're around people and you're learning and stuff. For an introvert like me, that is the most energy draining thing I can think of. So actually staying home with a cup of tea and a good Christian book and my Bible, that will be much more restorative for me. People who love getting out in nature and going for a bushwalk and feeling connected with God. I mean, you go up to the Blue Mountains and you see the majesty and the hugeness, and, you can be quite inspired to appreciate God through creation. That's a wonderful thing to know that's what you need. Others will enjoy liturgy and written prayers as a way of connecting with God, or being refreshed and restored in the spirit. So, it's just important to understand ourselves and understand what we like, and actually include them, and not think that the only way that we can relate to God and be restored to him is, Bible study and church on Sundays. That's not the only way that we can connect with God or be restored in him as well. And in terms of our rest and resting well, trying to hit those three things, so recovery rest, restorative rest, and recreative rest, I think is a good way to have some balance and to do some self-diagnosis on where you're up to.
I think it's a really helpful idea. I mean, when you said it, I could instantly remember seasons in my life where the recovery, that's the one that's the Netflix blobbing. Absolutely, I've had seasons where that was way too big a part, and I can look back and think, that's because I actually wasn't doing very well in terms of my my work balance and what I was doing. And so that was quite helpful to think about that, because in some ways, when you think about it, good energizing rest does require some level of energy in some ways.
Absolutely.
And so if I'm so depleted that the way I'm resting, I just thought that was an interesting thing to think about, the kinds of rest. And that they're all important.
They are. But
they can help us as we kind of analyse, I guess, our way of resting. It can be really useful.
And as I was talking yesterday, I have had this bit of a theory that there's now a hierarchy. I've got to test this out. But I think recovery rest is what we really need at our base, a little bit like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think it goes recovery, restoration, and then recreative. I think recreative is the pinnacle. So if I'm baking, then life must be good because I feel like I've got some time.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. So I want to flick it over to you guys in a sec, but just before we do, is there anything else that you're just wanting to add? I mean, things will come out as people ask questions as well, though.
Yeah, I think people ask
You're happy for that?
questions and then I'll just chime in.
All right. So over to you guys. And again, if you can just tell us your name and where you're from. Are there any questions or comments? Yeah, any reflections of just what Lynnette's been sharing? Anything that you're kind of mulling over at the moment?
Hi, Rosalind Deal. I have 2 part-time jobs. One of them is, both of them are connected with special religious education in schools.
Yeah.
Now my question is, I've got 2 questions, so you can choose which one you want to answer. A bit more information on restorative rest. Is that connected with God, or is it something general? And the other question is, supervision is for your job. Who should pay for that?
Good question.
Yeah, good questions. Yeah. So restorative rest, I think, should have a component of connecting with God, because ultimately He is our restoration and our wellspring. So I think there should be time where we enjoy Him in a way that works for us. So as I said, for some people, for some of the people that I work with, they absolutely love getting out in nature and feel strongly connected to God in that way. I feel most connected with God when I'm reading a good Christian book and something in the Psalms and journaling. Like that's what works for me. But it is other things like, you know, those friendships that I was talking about, those peer relationships where you're being encouraged and fed and doing that with the other person as well, of course. And there'll be other things. It's working out what are the things that you do that actually fill your tank.
Thanks.
Now, when it comes to supervision, it's challenging to work out who should pay. So I absolutely think that employers should invest in their employees and pay for them to have supervision. But that's not always possible in Christian organisations. So I think certainly in my first parish role, I paid for it myself. And I had no problems doing that because it was such great benefit for me. And the church gave me the time to do that. So I needed to travel to see her. So that was just a part of one of my work days every month. In my role with the Baptists, they quite happily paid for that. And at the moment, because I have my own private practice, I pay for that myself. In terms of my clientele, all of my mentees pay for themselves, but 80% of my supervisees would have it paid for by their work or their ministry. Yeah. So I would encourage you to have a discussion with whoever's paying you about, you know, the need for supervision and support in that way, and negotiate.
Yeah, it's a good question because I mean it's very practical and it's a really useful question actually. Yeah. Any other comments or questions anyone wants to?
Can I ask Jenny again? Women's ministry at City Central Presbyterian in Wollongong. Is it indelicate to ask how much a session or whatever costs for the professional supervision?
Absolutely not indelicate question at all. So supervision will generally range from about $80 an hour up to 175. So the higher end is when you have supervision with psychologists and counsellors. So there's two different types of supervision. So there's clinical supervision and there's pastoral supervision. So clinical supervision, predominantly in the past, has been for counsellors and psychologists and social workers as they practice their field. Pastoral supervision is what we're really trying to promote for people in ministry. The difference between clinical and pastoral supervision is that pastoral supervision is Christian and very much includes theological reflection and discussion about God.
Okay. So would you say the professional supervision is more about self-preservation than know-how about how to actually do the job? It's about whilst you're doing. So do people come to you when they're on the brink of burnout and have been traumatized or
sometimes? Yeah. So I definitely deal with people in burnout, but I also deal with people who want us to recognise that staying healthy in ministry takes work and they want someone to work with them on that. So the majority of the male ministers have a female supervisor to have a different voice into their practice, which is they find really helpful. And women ask different questions to what their male counterparts do. As well. It's not only about self-preservation. So it's also about you can check practice, you can reflect on what you're doing in terms of your casework, and you can get some pastoral advice on, am I working the right way in this situation? Can you help me to think through how can I deal with this situation? So there's lots of preemptive work as well. And my goal is to keep my people from getting to burnout, but sometimes clients come to you because they are burnt out. And so I've just worked with a children's minister who has burnt out, and over a period of 6 months we've done a lot of work to get her healthy, and I'm just helping her reintegrate back into work, and that has included working with her to renegotiate with her boss how she operates, what are her days off, that sort of stuff. And then so we're now in the next phase of me monitoring and helping her to put in those good habits and have those hard conversations so that she can stay in ministry.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
That's a good questions, Jenny.
And sometimes it is upskilling people. Like sometimes I will work with upskilling people in different aspects where they might be lacking. But they're the ones that drive that. So I don't tell them that they need to. They come to me and say, Lynnette, can you help me work out how I can do this? And there'll be different ways that I do that.
Hi, Lynnette. Heather here from Albury.
Hi, Heather.
Hi. I was just wondering quickly, how much of your practice at the moment is done remotely, or do you have all your clients see you and see you in person? And what are the obstacles or barriers that you've noticed if you have done some remotely? And is it better in person, or can it be done effectively like via the internet?
No, absolutely can be done effectively via the internet. What I found has been helpful in my practice is to, if it's at all possible, to meet with the person face to face for the first session at least. And then go remotely. So I have a number of people that I deal with remotely. One I've had a prior relationship with, so that was really easy to do. But I have a couple of ministers down the coast, and what we did is we had 2 face-to-face sessions that matched up with when they were in Sydney. But then we've just transferred over to remote, and that's really fine.
And does it work more effectively for supervision or for mentoring? Sorry, can't you hear me? Does it work more effectively for one or the other?
I think it works really well for supervision. I think with some of the strategies and techniques I use with mentoring, because I like to do some body work. So that means kind of getting people up to do some physical stuff, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible.
Okay.
I think that's just a preference and a modality, a use of modalities. Yeah. So I think you can do either fine. Yeah. And the internet makes it really easy. So there's, particularly for mentoring, there's always homework and things to follow up on. So you just email stuff out, and often probably technology is more the issue than anything else.
Yeah.
That fails at times. But as long as you're comfortable, you know, you can always talk with them on the phone. And, you know, taking, if it's a longer session, you might take a break in the middle. There's different ways to manage it. But I found it works great.
I just had one quick question as well about the Myers-Briggs things, if that's okay. So you were saying that when you're under pressure, you tend to go back to type.
Yeah.
Have you ever noticed it going the other way, where people actually react in the completely opposite way to what you would expect under great pressure?
Not in my experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
So does that mean that I've kind of misread myself?
Well, no, not necessarily.
Like, I'll just give an example. So I've just noticed over the years that when I'm under great pressure, rather than being my normal extrovert self that I am pretty much 100% of the time, I become really introverted and need a lot of time alone. So I just find that, like, it scares everybody around me when I'm like that, which hasn't been recently, but it scares everybody around me because I'm not myself. And it's obviously a big warning sign, like it's only been in really bad times. So I'm just wondering about that. It's just been a curious.
No, I think though that's a reality of ministry, right? Like it can be exhausting. So even for the most extroverted person, we still need time to recover and to recuperate at different times. Now, so I wouldn't think so much about that as being a reverting to type.
Oh, okay.
But more the reality of ministry is that it's costly, and if we're not aware of what our needs are, and that is that as an extrovert, that doesn't mean that you're on 24/7. You still need downtime. But if you think in your head, I'm an extrovert, so I always have to be with people and I always have to do this, then you're not allowing yourself, because no one's ever 100% anything. And one of the ways that I frame Myers-Briggs when I'm working with it is that it's an indicator. It doesn't tell us exactly who we are. It can't tell us our exact needs and things. But it is a good indicator also to help us to grow in our deficits. So my being a high J actually can be a deficit. So one of the things that we need to use Myers-Briggs for is a way for us to grow. So that we're growing, you know, closer to being a bit even with things. But knowing that when we're stressed, we will generally revert to type.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's what's happening with you. I think you're just possibly a bit exhausted and need time to recuperate. And that's okay. And is actually a good thing. And is probably actually an indicator that maybe you need to have a chat with someone and think through how life is going and how you're caring for yourself in particular. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Any other questions or comments before we wrap up?
Just quickly, you were saying that often people come to you when they've reached burnout.
Mm-hmm.
What would be, say, 3 signs? I just held up 4 fingers. That's ridiculous. What would be, say, 3 signs before someone would come to you, or maybe their boss says, okay, you need to go and I want you to go and spend some time talking to somebody?
Yeah. So one of the classic signs is whether they want to get out of bed or not in the morning and go to work.
Yep.
So whether they just prefer to stay in bed, that's always a good indicator. When their relationship with God is really struggling. So again, in ministry, we do ministry out of who we are. And so if they're finding it really hard to relate and connect with God, that for me is a sign that they're dry, at least. Yep. When they're sitting there and talking to me about their role and they're in tears, yeah, that's another good indicator. But also how I talked about the types of rest, that's one of the things that I ask to get some insight. So when they tell me that what they did on their day off was binge watch Netflix, that's when I get concerned. Unless there has, if they've run a kids club that week and Friday night they're Netflix binging, that's fine. But if it's a consistent pattern over a number of months, that's one of the signs for me. I also tend to ask about their sleeping patterns and what that is like as well. And also how they're feeling. So what's the emotion that they most identify with before they go into something that they're actually, a ministry that they're actually running. So how are they feeling before Bible study or running kids club? I really want to know about their anxiety levels and what's going on there. Because if they're feeling really anxious about doing the thing that they've been employed for, there's something that's not quite right there. So I think I just gave you 5.
That's great. Thank you.
Anyone else? Maybe just a last comment or question before we wrap up.
I just want to say thanks. I found it very, very informative.
Good. Great to have you with us, Roz. It's so encouraging. I was saying to Lynnette that I get nervous every time. I just think, oh, no one's going to show up, we're just going to be sitting here on our own, and just seeing people, just seeing your faces pop up on the screen and knowing that, we're connecting from across the state. Like, it's truly deeply encouraging to connect together as sisters in Christ. So thank you all so much. And can I ask the same favour I asked last time? Is my technical skills, are very limited. And so I still haven't worked out how to do a screenshot. And I think Heather or Cherie, you might have done that. I really should figure out how to do it, shouldn't I? But I just love getting a shot. Would one of you, do you mind, Heather, doing that for me? You did it very well last time. Again, note to self, should work that out. But, my skills only go so far. So very quickly, anyone else, just last chance to ask a question or say anything. Otherwise, I'll pray for us as we finish.
Can I say one thing?
Please.
Ladies, just remember that life is a marathon, and that we will have different seasons and different rhythms in our life, and that at different times, different things will work for us. There is no one thing that we will do for the rest of our lives other than spending time with Jesus, which will meet our needs. So always be ready to mix it up, to try different things, but please take looking after yourself seriously. God wants you to serve him and his people for a long time. And in order for you to do that, he needs you to look to Jesus, to see his humanity, and to be reminded that he's given you a bodied, limited humanity to live within, and that he's using you as his broken vessels to love and serve the people that he's put you amongst. So treasure that, value that.
There was a lovely little phrase you said yesterday when we were chatting, which I think you'll say something like that: God is more invested or is more concerned for us to be with him than to do for. Can you remember that? Is that how it went?
I do. Yeah.
So, and I think that's a lesson I think I really had to learn, that I think I used to think God is more concerned and cares more about what I'm doing for him. And I think in more recent years, I've realised God is way more delighted in me being with him, and that my ministry flows out of that.
Absolutely. I'm glad you remembered that.
Yeah, that's a lovely little gem, you know,
Yeah.
that's a helpful thought.
Yeah.
So guys, Lynnette has some lovely few resources
Yeah.
that that's something I've always appreciated about Lynnette, is just her ability to put helpful things into my hands. So she's kindly offered to email me with those, and I'll send them out to you guys. Again, you don't have to look at them if you don't want to, but I'll certainly send them to you, and there might be some things in there that you find helpful to keep thinking about. Let me pray as we finish.
Can I shamelessly plug? Is that all right?
Yeah, shamelessly plug.
So if any of you are interested in supervision or mentoring with me, I do have some spots, and my going rate is $100 for a session. Just so you know, in case you're interested. And you can...
Slower, Deeper, Wiser. Is that, you've got a website?
I have a website.
Yeah, so slower, deeper,
wiser.com.
Yeah. Yep, excellent. Yeah, and I could highly recommend Lynnette. Yeah, absolutely. Let me pray as we say goodnight. Father God, we just thank you for your wonderful grace and mercy in drawing us into fellowship with you. Father, thank you that in your kindness, you've called us to minister to your people. And thank you, Father, for the way you minister to us. Lord God, I pray that as we reflect and think about how we are serving your people, Lord God, I pray that you might fill us with growing joy and delight in Christ. Father God, give us wisdom, give us energy, give us great love and patience in our work. Help us to be honest with ourselves. Help us to lean on you. Help us to be women who are more concerned with being with you, Jesus, than striving to do for you. Lord, I pray that our fruitfulness in life and ministry would come out of a real and vital and intimate connection with you, Lord God. I pray, Father God, thank you for Lynnette. Thank you for the many years of experience and wisdom and insight. Thanks for her honesty in sharing with us. And I just pray that you might, Lord God, as we finish tonight, fill us, Lord, with your spirit, strengthen us, encourage us to continue to run the race with perseverance. Help us to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. And it is in his name we pray together tonight. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, everybody. And as I say, always good to hear your feedback. I think you've got my email. If there's other topics, things you wanted to comment on, please feel free. Really happy to have your honest feedback. And thanks for joining in. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, ladies.
Bye.